Thank you, Sue, and thank you for inviting me. And I'm absolutely delighted as well that Fatima is going to be speaking as well, and going to be speaking afterwards, I think, probably about her Muslim faith and about Islam. And I was thinking about this and reflecting on this for myself, and it reminds me so much, actually, that at the moment we are missing so much in supporting women's faith and belief systems in our care at the moment. When I was a student nurse, and this was, if I have to say, 45 years ago, that's actually the truth. There are many people that we cared for from many different faiths and beliefs. I was working in London at the time, and they had rituals and traditions that they were following around birth and around death, because I was a student nurse at the time. And it was a big trigger to start me questioning why we are not supporting this in our own culture, but also in the NHS as well. And I carried on thinking about this when I became a student midwife and a midwife after that, and followed on from that. But religious and non-religious beliefs have become a tick box. That was 40 years ago, and it still is now. And I suspect, and you can probably say things in the chat about this, it's actually worse with using computers, the kind of questions that we're asking of people. Well, what is spirituality? Well, actually, I've got no time to even talk about that, really. I've only got 15 minutes, so there's a lot that you can read up about it. But this definition actually came from a study that we did, when I would say we, Susan Crowther, and I did with a group, an international midwives, when we were looking literally about spirituality itself. And this quote is: spirituality represents an aspect of our lives that brings meaning, sense of purpose, unifies our life narrative, feelings of interconnectivity, and of deepening relationships with self and others being seen and unseen. It may be connected to religion and also a belief in the quality of divinity, but not necessarily. It's part of our well-being and includes psychological, emotional, and cultural aspects of being and becoming. I see midwifery in this as well, and I hope you can, by actually looking at some of these aspects that are there. And we often talk about spirituality as being part of an holistic paradigm. And over the years of my practice, we have talked about all these different things. We've talked about holistic care, we've talked about whole person care, individualized care, humanized care, and now we're on this personalized care, which is in better births. And holism is the belief that all life is connected and interdependent, that it's a whole system. And personalised care has this is from the actual website, that says that people have choice and control over the way their care is planned and received based on what matters to them and their individual needs and preferences. So what matters to them? How do you know what matters to the people that you are caring for? I would argue that you can't truly do whole person care or to think about what matters to them if you're not going to consider the religious and spiritual meanings for those people. It needs to be included in some way. Now, in my doctoral study, which I did 10 years ago now, this was a quote from a community midwife. Sorry, it's a bit long. I've actually edited down a bit, but she was talking about spirituality and how she was community midwife and working with different religious groups. But what she's saying, she thinks it's wrong to pretend that you know it all, and that you make assumptions about different people's religious beliefs. And that she's saying here that there are obviously different extremes of particular religious beliefs. So it's always worth establishing people's spiritual beliefs as to exactly how they would practice. Even in the recognised religion, you can't tar everybody with the same brush. It's paramount to consider the individual. And she recognised that even if you have a faith or you doesn't, it means Doesn't mean to say that you're going to follow the teachings in the same way, and maybe Fatima is going to touch on that later, I don't know. But religious belief is meaningful. It's meaningful to people, and it is often a lifestyle. It impacts everything that they do, impacts everything in their life. But spiritual beliefs also have that kind of impact, and especially in the transition of a new life, of coming into motherhood. And it brings powerful spiritual meanings for a woman, or birthing person, her partner, her family, her community. Bringing a baby, or actually even if there's a baby loss as well, that it will have an impact on so many different people, not just on that person. And we've got to remember that as midwives, because that birth is life-changing, completely life-changing. And as Sarah Wickham says in this quote here, is that when we birth, we don't just birth babies, we birth ourselves, we birth our families, and we reshape our lives. And I think sometimes we really do forget this, because they just come into us and then they go away again. But it's actually the impact of what we're doing, the kind of care that we're giving on that person has an impact on their community and their lifestyle for a long time afterwards. And it's whether it's a straightforward birth or it's an assisted birth, it doesn't matter which, it's going to have an impact and spiritual meaning to them. And this is from a study from Christina Prinz, who also does work on spirituality in Denmark, I think. And they did a piece of work about the existential meanings of motherhood. And she talks about this depth of change. It recognizes the values and what makes life worth living, and to some women a spiritual experience. All the references, by the way, will be at the end of the PowerPoint, and also on the list that Sue sort of posts as well. But I'd also just like to read you a little story as well, or a little sort of quote. Actually, this is from the book Spirituality in Childbirth, which was edited by myself and Susan Crowther as well. Are you sitting comfortably? What does it feel like being pregnant? I knew as I felt different, not just physical things. This was before the missing the period thing, before the strange metallic taste in my mouth that put me off drinking tea. I knew before the feeling nauseous in the mornings and slightly lightheaded in the evenings. I knew before I had desperate cravings to eat certain foods such as yogurt and very spicy curry and celery. I knew before the urgency to get to the toilet to empty my bladder. I knew before the stretching of my skin over my lower abdomen. I knew there was a person inside me. As the weeks moved on, that person would become more real as she moved and shifted in response to the daily moments of my life. Eating meals would provide a variety of responses. Sitting and lying down would be the times of greatest movements and connection between us. They were the times when I was most aware and wanting to connect, sometimes communicating without words, sometimes talking to her. Music playing would either soothe or encourage movements, and the effect of this was noted following birth, when the music of a favourite soap I had watched during pregnancy would quiet a fractious baby. She is a person now, and was a person then inside me. Coming to birth and shifting from the world of the womb to the one outside it. We recognised each other, bonded from the relationship we had already developed over the 9 months previously. We had some shared genes and a shared experience of motherhood. We still have a shared humanity. But also don't assume that this is just for those who have uncomplicated lives or straightforward lives. This was a quote from somebody that I cared for at one point, who was a recovering drug addict. And it's exactly the words she said. I got people to tell me about my drugs and pregnancy and stuff. I just want someone who will listen to me and help me spiritually and pray. never assume the person in front of you is not going to be interested or want to talk about their beliefs and their feelings about things. But why must we talk about this more? Well, it's there in the International Confederation of Midwives philosophy of midwife, of midwifery care. That it's holistic, midwifery is holistic and continuous in nature, grounded in understanding of the social, emotional, cultural, spiritual, psychological, and physical experiences of women. It's there. In traditional societies, midwives often have a powerful faith or spiritual role. In Western society, midwifery has often been grounded in spirituality as well, as Sue has already mentioned earlier, and also sort of in faith backgrounds. This is from Hildegard Bingen, who was in Germany in 1098, and she was a abbess in a monastery, and she was talking about what to do if somebody is a neighbour, and so she is talking about faith and about prayer, basically. So if she's not able to give birth, rub sard, which I think is kind of lard, kind of like an oily type thing, on both of her thighs and say, just as you stone by the order of God shone on the first angel, so you, child, come forth shining person who dwells with God. And then immediately hold the stone at the exit, that is the female member, and say, open your roads and door in that epiphany by which Christ appeared, both human and God, and opened the gates of hell. Just so, child, may you also come out of this door without dying, and without the death of your mother, and then tie the same stone to a belt and cinch it around her, and she will be cured. We could perhaps try that in the NHS a little bit more. But possibly it's to do with prayer. And obviously in those times, women did die quite a lot in childbirth, and so did the babies. And so actually the midwives having faith in order to pray for them was quite important. But also, you know, midwifery and nursing has come from, in the Western world, has come from religious backgrounds quite a lot. And Julia Allison's study, which she had done about Tudor midwifery, and if you haven't found that book, highly recommend it because it's absolutely fascinating. But again, that's on the reference list. But the midwives there were also very important to the church, to the Catholic Church, who was in Britain at that time. And they had to take oaths in front of the priest to say that they would be honest in what they did. There's a whole oath that Julia has written out of what they had to say. But they also had to learn how to do baptism, because in case the baby died and the priest couldn't get there on time, then the midwives had to do it. And I was reflecting on this with Sue recently as well, that actually as a student nurse and a midwife, I learned how to do baby baptism. Because as a midwife, again, it was expected that if the Catholic priest couldn't get there on time, then actually the midwives were meant to be doing it and meant to be part of it. But we also often talk about birth and labour as being sacred and a sacred space, and it is something that we talk about perhaps quietly, but we don't necessarily discuss it enough. However, it is very clearly now in the NMC standards, the new standards of midwifery, of proficiency for midwives, and it's also in May's midwifery, Sue's just shown me. And the standards are very, very clear there. If you haven't been aware of this fact, go and read it. Go and read the standards of proficiency of what's being expected of you now and what's being expected in education. And as it says in the domains here, that they talk about spiritual safety and they talk about the spiritual factors. So it's very clearly there within that documentation. So we do need to talk about this more. And Sue Crowther and I have written in the Practicing Midwife last year and the year before about these education standards. So if you haven't seen those articles, and for those who are educators and for students, you might find those interesting to help you to think about it going forward, about what you're going to do. So what can you do? I'm just going to give you some very quick questions, which I created a while ago, but that perhaps you could ask of the women and of yourselves as well. So in the antenatal period, what does she feel about this pregnancy? Does she have any reservations about it? Does she have a belief that is meaningful to her? So rather than just asking about what religion she is, what is a meaningful belief to her? Does this affect her views on the pregnancy or the birth and the choices that she's going to make? Are there places she goes or things she does where she gains strength? Does she pray or meditate? Are there people she has connecting relationships who are her main support? I mean, it could be the religious community, it could be something completely different, but things that actually are good for her spiritually are important to know. And then in birth, does she have strong views about where she's going to have the baby? Does she place meaning on the type of birth she wants to have? Does she have people she wants to be around her during labour who are going to be her special support? And another question, are we going to facilitate that? Because we've not been good at that. How can you be present at all times with the women during labour? If you don't understand the concept of presence, I don't have time to talk about that just at this minute. But to be able to go and think about and go read about it, and if you want to ask it in the questions, that's also fine, and I can discuss it a little bit more, but that can take a whole session. But what can also be done about the organisation and structures to help women have spiritual care? And also in postnatal care, are there cultural or religious traditions you'd like to carry out at the birth or after? Are there religious leaders or others she would like to see the baby immediately? And how can you help her to establish an appropriate relationship with her new baby? Because that's a spiritual relationship between the mother and the child. What can be done about postnatal organisation and structures to help women have spiritual care? Don't get me on that. Okay, now there's also in this book, we also, at the final and the conclusion of this book, we also ask some other questions. I've still got time, Sue, it's all right. So, what if we recognised every pregnancy as significant? What if we were to view each environment where birth takes place as one that is a sacred space, to be respected and treated with awe? Would we change the trappings within the space, make it more comfortable and comforting? Would we walk softly, speak respectfully and calmly, and encourage others to do the same? Would we slow down? Would we reconsider the ability for people to enter the space without knocking and being invited in? What if midwives were truly able to be there and hold the space, enabling a woman to feel safe to go into her zone during labour? What if midwives and medical staff were able to support partners to support the women better? What would it be like if midwives and doctors could freely speak about spirituality and childbirth without fear of being ridiculed? What if we were to recognise the spiritual nature of the unborn baby as well? Would we start to question some of the actions we take or offer through pregnancy, labour and beyond? Would it help us to respect more deeply the strength of the mother-baby dyad and invest more in nurturing this relationship from conception or even preconception to support the well-being of the mother and therefore the growing unborn? What if we were able to have all the time possible to listen to women during the childbirth continuum and help them to make the right decisions for their situation and for their baby, or to alleviate their fear and anxieties? Would this enable us to find out where they gain their strength and the rich meanings they hold on to from every day? And of course, all of this was so much easier if you have continuity of carer. And this is another quote from another community midwife that I spoke to during my studies, that if she says that if we lose sight of what a midwife is, we lose the soul of the profession. And she thinks the meaning of the art of midwifery, it's the essence of the job, more than the physical side of the work we actually do. I would say it's more the spiritual side we bring into it, our feelings about the type of work that we do, working with the woman and the family, and bringing out the spiritual side of it, listening to the woman and their views and building a relationship with the woman. The spirituality of it is the relationship you build with your woman. That is a whistle-stop beginning tour And there's lots of articles, etc. There's a whole reference list there, but there's also actually a whole body of literature that is now being prepared across the world, not just in our country. I mean, there's a wonderful paper, I've lost it now, but there's a fabulous paper that was written this year called The Spiritual Experiences of Portuguese Women Who Had a Water Birth. Highly recommend it. I haven't put it on the reference list actually there, but actually things like that. And there are plenty of studies that are out there, and Susan Crowther's work, her work on mood during birth and things like that are fantastic. And I do recommend you to not ignore this, but to take it further. So I'm going to stop there because I'm running over time. But thank you so much for listening. And there's my email, there's my Twitter account, and do make contact if you want to continue this discussion. Thank you.